The following Sunday morning, Nand arrived at the cafe carrying a notebook. As soon as Nilkanth sat down, Nand smiled. Nilkanth, I've been watching several videos about Hindu Undivided Families. Almost everyone says an HUF is one of the best ways to save income tax. I think I should open one immediately. Nilkanth smiled but didn't answer immediately. Before we discuss how to open an HUF, let's first find out whether you actually need one. Many people can create one, Nilkanth replied, but not everyone gains from it. Nilkanth asked, why do you want to form an HUF? Nand answered honestly, to save income tax.
Nilkanth nodded. That's the most common answer. But tax saving alone is never a sufficient reason. Let's understand your family situation first. He continued, are you a Hindu, Jain, Buddhist or Sikh? Nand replied, yes. Nilkanth asked, are you married? Nand replied, yes. Nilkanth further asked, do you have children? Nand replied, yes, we have one daughter. Nilkanth made a note. Good. Now tell me about your family. Does your father already have an HUF? Nand replied, I'm not sure. That's something you should find out. Many families already have an existing HUF, and understanding that structure is important before creating another one.
Nand wrote it down. Nilkanth continued, does your family own any ancestral property? Nand replied, no. Nilkanth asked, have you inherited any ancestral assets? Nand replied, not yet. Nilkanth asked, do you expect to inherit any family property in the future? Nand replied, possibly. Good. That information matters because certain assets may legally belong to an HUF while others remain individual property.
Nand nodded thoughtfully. Nilkanth turned the page. Now, let's discuss your own assets. What all do you personally own? I have some mutual funds, fixed deposits, a few shares, and my house. Nilkanth asked, any agricultural land? Or any rental property? Nand replied, not at present. Nilkanth smiled. Now let's move to income. What are all your sources of income? My salary, bank interest, dividends, and a little capital gain from mutual funds. Nilkanth further asked, do you run any business? Or do you work as a professional consultant? Nand replied, no. So almost all your income is earned personally, Nilkanth said. Nand replied, yes.
Nilkanth looked at him and said, can your salary legally become HUF income simply because you transfer it into an HUF bank account? Nand thought for a moment. I suppose, yes? Nilkanth smiled. Actually, no. He continued, income is generally taxed based on who legally earns it or owns the asset that generates it. Merely transferring money into an HUF account does not automatically change who is liable to pay tax. That's why understanding the source of income is far more important than opening the account. Nand quickly corrected his notes. I never realized that. Nilkanth continued, tell me, does your family run a business that could legally belong to an HUF? Do you expect any property or investments to be gifted specifically to the HUF? No. Do you intend to purchase future assets directly in the HUF's name? I haven't thought about it. Nilkanth said, that's another important question. After finishing his coffee, Nilkanth asked another series of questions. Which income tax regime do you currently follow? Nand replied, the new regime. What is your approximate annual taxable income? Nand answered, have you already evaluated whether the HUF would actually reduce your family's overall tax liability? Nand smiled awkwardly. I haven't calculated anything. That's exactly why calculations should come before conclusions. Nilkanth continued, what is your real objective? Only tax saving? Or do you also want better succession planning, separate ownership of family assets, centralized family investments, or a vehicle to run a family business? Nand paused. I honestly hadn't thought beyond tax. He then pointed to another page. Creating an HUF also brings responsibilities. Are you prepared to maintain a separate PAN, a separate bank account, separate books of accounts if required, a separate income tax return every year? Nand replied, yes. Nilkanth added, and are you willing to keep every HUF transaction completely separate from your personal finances? Nand nodded. I understand why that's necessary. Nilkanth leaned back. Now let's think long term. What happens if your family grows? What if there is a partition? Who will become the next Karta after you? Are all family members comfortable with assets being owned jointly by the HUF? Nand looked at his notebook. I never imagined there were so many practical questions. Nilkanth smiled. That's because most discussions begin with tax savings and end there. Good advisors begin with the family, the assets, the income, the objectives, and only then discuss tax. The cafe grew quiet for a moment. Finally, Nilkanth asked one last question. If your calculations show that creating an HUF does not reduce your tax at all, would you still want to create one? Nand remained silent. After a few moments, he smiled. I think I finally understand the real purpose of that question. Nilkanth nodded. If the answer is no, then the decision is being driven only by tax. An HUF should exist because it is the right legal structure for managing family assets and income. Any tax benefit should simply be a consequence of using that structure correctly. Nilkanth said, now you learned how to decide whether you should open one at all. Nand realized that asking the right questions often saves far more money than searching for quick tax-saving tricks. I finally understand that an HUF should be created for the right reasons, not just to save tax. But if I decide to form one, how do I begin? What should I do first? Nilkanth smiled. People often think opening an HUF is complicated. In reality, the process is quite straightforward. Nilkanth leaned forward. Before we move any further, let's first understand who the parties to an HUF are. Unless we know who belongs to an HUF and what their rights are, the rest of the discussion won't make much sense. An HUF consists of three important categories of people: the Karta, the co-parceners, and the members. Karta. The Karta is the head and manager of the Hindu Undivided Family, HUF. The Karta manages the HUF's business, investments, bank accounts, and other affairs, and represents the HUF in legal and financial matters. Co-parceners. Co-parceners are members of the HUF who acquire an interest in the HUF's co-parcenary property by birth or adoption. Members. A member is any person who belongs to the HUF. Members include Karta, wife of the Karta, sons, daughters, daughter-in-law, grandchildren, other family members who belong to the HUF under Hindu law. The senior-most co-parcener of the HUF is generally entitled to become the Karta. After legal developments, the senior-most eligible co-parcener, whether male or female, can be the Karta. Key responsibilities of Karta: manages HUF property and investments, operates the HUF bank account, files the HUF's income tax return, represents the HUF before banks, courts, and tax authorities, makes decisions for the benefit of the HUF. Rights of a co-parcener: has an ownership interest in the co-parcenary property, can demand partition of the HUF, can become the Karta if they are the senior-most eligible co-parcener, participates in important decisions relating to HUF property. After the Hindu Succession Amendment Act 2005, daughters have the same rights as sons and are also co-parceners. A member may enjoy the benefits of the HUF, but does not necessarily have the same legal rights as a co-parcener. For example, a wife of the Karta is a member, but is not a co-parcener merely by marriage. Nand closed his notebook and smiled. So now I know who the Karta is, who the co-parceners are, and who the members are. I also understand that an HUF should be formed only when it genuinely serves a family's legal and financial needs. Nilkanth nodded with satisfaction. Exactly. Most people rush to open an HUF without understanding its purpose, You've done the difficult part first, asking the right questions. He took a sip of his coffee and continued. Since you now understand the structure of an HUF, let's move to the next step, how an HUF is actually formed. Nand looked at Nilkanth. So, how do we create an HUF? Nilkanth said, you don't actually create an HUF the way you incorporate a company or register a partnership. Under Hindu law, an HUF comes into existence automatically when a Hindu family exists. The legal entity exists because of the family relationship, not because someone fills out a government form. Because although the family may already constitute an HUF, it cannot practically function until it receives a separate legal and financial identity.
Nand asked, do I need one, an HUF deed?
Nilkanth smiled and said,
Legally, an HUF is created by operation of Hindu law, not by a deed. So a deed isn't mandatory. But practically speaking, banks and other departments often ask for an HUF declaration or deed before opening an account. So the deed mainly records facts? Exactly. It records who the karta is, who the co-partners and members are, and declares that the family intends to conduct financial affairs through the HUF.
So, what's the first thing we do? Nand asked. The first practical step, Nilkanth replied, is obtaining a permanent account number, PAN, in the name of the HUF. Why PAN first? Because almost everything else depends on it. No bank account, no income tax return, no investments, no financial identity. Nand nodded. So, the PAN makes the income tax department recognize the HUF as a separate taxpayer. Exactly. Once we receive the PAN, can we open the HUF bank account? Nand asked. Nilkanth replied, yes, we can open the bank account. Nilkanth added, only Karta's signature will operate that bank account. But remember, the money inside that account belongs to the HUF, not to the Karta personally. So I shouldn't mix my salary with HUF money? Nand asked. Nilkanth immediately replied, never. Mixing personal and HUF funds creates unnecessary legal and tax complications. Nand underlined, personal money, not equal to HUF money. Nand looked confused. If the account is empty, how does an HUF begin? Nilkanth smiled and said, the HUF usually starts with an initial corpus. What is that? It could be a small contribution made to the HUF. It could also consist of ancestral property or assets already belonging to the HUF. In some cases, gifts validly made to the HUF may also form part of its corpus, subject to applicable legal and tax provisions. So the first money establishes the HUF's financial activity? Nand asked. Correct, Nilkanth replied. Can I simply transfer my salary into the HUF account? Nilkanth smiled and laughed. No. Then how does the HUF earn? Nand asked. It earns through assets that legally belong to the HUF. For example, rental income from HUF-owned property, interest on HUF fixed deposits, dividends from HUF investments, capital gains from HUF investments, business income earned by the HUF. So, ownership decides taxation. Exactly. Can the HUF invest just like an individual? Certainly, Nilkanth replied. It can invest in mutual funds, shares, fixed deposits, bonds, real estate, gold, business assets. But every investment must be made in the HUF's name using HUF funds. Nilkanth closed his notebook. Many people think opening the account finishes the process. It actually begins there. The HUF must maintain proper records, keep separate books where required, preserve supporting documents, file its own income tax return, comply with tax laws applicable to it. Nand smiled. So the HUF behaves almost like another person for tax purposes. Exactly, Nilkanth replied. Since the HUF is a separate taxpayer, income genuinely belonging to the HUF is taxed separately. It can claim deductions available under the Income Tax Act wherever applicable, maintain separate investments, own property, and build wealth for the family.
When I came here, I thought opening an HUF meant visiting a bank. He laughed. Now I realize that opening the bank account is probably the easiest part. Nilkanth smiled. That's true. The difficult part is deciding whether an HUF is appropriate for your family's circumstances, maintaining its separate identity, and using it correctly. He finished his coffee and said, "An HUF is not a tax-saving shortcut. It is a legal structure for managing family assets and income. When used correctly, tax efficiency may follow naturally." Nand closed his notebook. I've learned that understanding the law before completing the paperwork can save a family far more than simply chasing tax-saving ideas. Nilkanth smiled and said, "That's the difference between tax planning and tax avoidance. Good financial decisions begin with understanding the law, not trying to bypass it." Thank you for watching this video. We hope this discussion has helped you understand the right way to approach HUF formation. Remember, an HUF should be created because it is the right legal structure for your family's assets and income, not merely as a tax-saving tool.